Hi guys, welcome to this channel if you're new, and welcome back if you're a subscriber. I have around 1700 subscribers, which isn't a lot. The channel's only been going for a few months, but I'm forever grateful for them subscribers. My subscribers either tend to be young, between the age of say 16 to 30, or much older, 50, 55 plus. I don't seem to attract the people of my age. I don't mind that, that's fine. So I get the both extremes. And I get a lot of questions, I get around 40, 50 questions a day, private messages sent to me, in addition to the comments. One of the questions I have been asked often, or a lot of the questions I get asked are about life, happiness, love, depression. And firstly, my channel is solely a music reaction channel. I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist whatsoever. I've not been trained in that. I can't give any advice, and I would never pretend to. I think that's the first thing I'd like to declare and say. However, I think it's important to always hear a cry. I mean, if someone in your family or a friend of yours came up to you and asked you for advice, whether you were qualified academically or professionally or not, I'd like to think that we try and comfort them and give them some solace and some positivity. So that's what I did, and I started to do that with comments that were coming in, and that's kind of built momentum. So I get a lot more now, hence a couple of my videos have been less about music and more about life as I perceive it. I'm just going to come a bit closer so you can hear me. Right, okay. And the thing I want to point out is a key element in a question that I was asked very recently. And that question was, I find it difficult to know who I am. The way the question was asked to me, I won't say who asked it because I think that's unfair, is I have an issue with my identity. And she said to me, hi Hawksmere, you seem to be very confident when you do your videos. It started off by somebody wanting to do videos like I do. So you seem very confident when you do your videos. I would love to do them, but I am not very confident on the screen. Neither am I. And then she went on to say, I have issues about my own identity. So I responded to her and I said, the first bit, I can help you work on. Because I'm not confident either, and I can tell you how I overcame that issue, or how I've given the perception that I've overcome that issue. And the second thing is identity, and I really thought about that, and I didn't want to give her an arsey, pretentious, unnecessarily overly profound answer, but I think identity is a very interesting word. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the word I, or me, and identity. Now, identity is just obviously something you identify yourself with, right? So you can identify yourself as a particular specific gender, age, religion, country. You can say you're British, though that could be your origin or your citizenship or your nationality. It can still be your identity. Your identity can be your faith. If someone was to ask you, can you identify yourself? You might give your name. That's another element of identity. So it's just a group, a grouping, I wouldn't call it conforming to a group, but association of a group or a collective being. But if you take that group away, or that collective being away, then identifying yourself becomes a bit more tricky. And what I mean by that is, the second part of that question is, who am I, or to describe what me is. And if you really think about these old phrases, biblical phrases, and I'm not going to go into religion here because I do not practice any religion. I'm a Sikh, and the word Sikh means learner. But the old phrase mind, body and soul sounds like a biblical phrase, but it actually goes back much further than that. It's not the Holy Trinity, but it is very relevant in identification of oneself. And what I mean by that is this. If you think about it, the mind, the body and the soul, which one of them three elements makes you who you are? So we start with the mind. The mind in itself is just a process of thoughts, right? You can agree on that? Process of thoughts that are made up of electrons, that are made up of very physical elements within your mind, your brain, if you like. And them two themselves are very distinctive. But these elements are purely subjective and based on what you remember. So your mind is 100% dependent on your past. Think about that. If you was to try and, right now as you are, think about anything, but not think about its relevance in the past, it's very difficult. Right now, imagine a world as you're sitting there without memory. Imagine a world where you have no recollection of what happened a minute ago. Can you do that? One way to imagine that is somebody with severe dementia, where they have lost 80-90% of their memory, but they can remember things very, very far back, but not things that happened just a few seconds, weeks, months, hours, minutes, days ago. Now, it's difficult to do that because that's what the mind is. It's 90% of what we do is out of habit. The 10% of what we do that's conscious, a conscious choice or a conscious decision, is also based on memory. You can take any example in life. If I was to go back here, this tree here, it's a Japanese maple tree, but if I wanted to prune it, I will prune it, and the pruning that I do will be based on logic, and that logic has been conformed by memory, education, things I've read and seen about it. I won't improvise. I will use knowledge. Knowledge in itself is an accumulation of memory, because if you go to an exam, for example, on any subject, and you sit an exam, the result of your exam will be directly determined by what you remember in the exam, and then how you project that onto paper or computer. It's just memory. The second thing is the mind in itself has different states of consciousness, and I used that word conscious earlier, 10% conscious. To give you an example of some of these states, if you're asleep, you're in a state of consciousness. You're still conscious. If your alarm bell goes off or you hear a noise or your partner snores or whatever, you may wake up. So there is still a state of consciousness. But then in your sleep you may dream. That dream is also a state of consciousness, isn't it? It's not a physical reality, but it is still a visual interpretation of data in your brain. Now, should you be lucky to wake up and remember that dream, and you recollect it and you describe it to somebody, you're doing that from memory. Memory is also a state of consciousness. And then when you start to talk and describe it or even draw it, it's a different state of consciousness. It's a different part of your brain working, because then you are conveying your mental or visualization of your memory into something physical. So what actors do. Acting is a state of consciousness, and we do that in life, throughout life. Every day I'm doing it now. And then there is different states of consciousness beyond that, which are subject to, you can even call it similar to the visual spectrum. Now, everybody's eyesight is different in this world. Everyone's, they may be very close to, someone may have 20/20, someone may have 20.3, etc. There's a Spitfire going ahead, so please excuse the noise. But if you look at some animals, and if you could see the world through their eyes, through their lenses, you would see that they see it completely different to you and I. The visual spectrum is different. A bumblebee's visual spectrum is different. If you put just a filter in front of a telescope, the visual spectrum is different. 99% of the pictures you see through the Hubble telescope are all to do with visual spectroscopy, if I pronounce that correct. Because the visual spectrum also is, from gamma rays to X-rays to, microwave rays and every type of microrays and every rays in between. There's a tiny element of what we call the visual spectrum, but the rest of it still exists. It still exists, we just can't see it. That's very similar to consciousness. There are different levels of consciousness. We live in a very third dimensional consciousness, or what we perceive as reality, and that mind is comfortable there. We create this comfort because comfort creates security, and we are animals at the end of the day, and we are 99% dependent on convenience and security. But point being, the mind is not you. It's just a ever fluid state of consciousness. If I was to sit still and meditate with my eyes shut and really weren't within, my state of consciousness is on a different level. Not to yours, but to my state now. In other words, I'm out of the visual spectrum, to use an example. So you cannot be your mind, can you? You cannot be a state of consciousness. Does that make sense? So we can eliminate the mind as you. You can eliminate the categorizing or identifying yourself as a mind. Mind, body and soul. Next comes the body. The body is there is again terms like ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Everything you see behind me, everything you see in front of you and behind you has come from this earth. And everything will go back to this earth. This tree is going up. One day it'll start doing that, and then it'll go like that, and it'll fall. And once it's fallen, it'll all be eaten away, it'll decompose, it'll go back into the earth. The body does that, doesn't it? Now, whether you are cremated or buried, you go back to the earth, don't you? You throw the ashes in the air, they eventually come back to the earth. The body itself is nothing but what you have accumulated from the earth. And it's amazing, isn't it? If you eat, if we could eat this stuff, just grass, and that's all we had in our diet, we will obviously be malnourished, but our body will still look like a body. It will still look like a human being. It will still have 2 arms, 2 legs, etc. And it will continue to grow. Your body wouldn't change into being a piece of grass. You are not therefore identified as grass, are you? You won't say, I am grass, because that just sounds stupid. You are a human. But your body can add this substance, the earth, the dust, as we call it, the ashes, and transfer that data, and it is just data, into a person. Now, are you more of a being? I'm not talking the physical being, I'm talking about identification of yourself. The bigger you become, in other words, do you become more you as you accumulate more dirt or food? No, you don't. You're the same being as you were when you were born, aren't you? You don't become a different being just because you put on a few pounds. And therefore, it's always also fluid, isn't it? You're also continuously changing your body. And if that's the case, then there's no absolute you in body. I'm just using basic logic. So you will never be your body. So we can eliminate that. We can eliminate the mind, because that's not you. We can eliminate the body, because that's not you. And we're left with the soul. Now what the hell is that? Soul is just a man-made word. It's just a word to interpret something as we can perceive as the spirit. Are you a soul? Now, Newton was a scientist, a very famous scientist who really understood the principles of light, as did other scientists. And there's some great theories about, I'm from a physics background, and there's some great theories in science about light. There's loads of experiments about light. Light is a phenomenal thing. It's a constant in space speed. It's a massless photon. It's also a wave. It's a beautiful thing. Studying it's very, very interesting. The try and stay with me here, and if I'm not explaining this correctly, it's not because you fail to understand, it's because I failed to explain it. E equals mc squared is a very it's a formula that a lot of physicists use, a lot of scientists use to describe a lot of things that are made in the back of that formula. It's a very strong principle created by Einstein, revealed by Einstein. E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times c squared. C is light, yes, but it's actually the speed of a massless photon, which happens to be 299,000 meters per second, kilometers per second, sorry. But really, C doesn't exist. What I mean by that is, if you think about it, if light is continuously traveling at the constant maximum speed, and the light from a star to reach me, or the light behind me that reaches me, has no end. I'm not saying the end is immeasurable, I'm saying it has no end, which also means it has no start. And that's where the concept of time, which is nothing but displacement and motion, comes into question, because time in itself has to be related to something. We relate it to the arrow of time. It has to be related to displacement or motion of particles with mass. You cannot, the speed of light, but you can't time it. Two very different things. You can't get beyond it and create a detector. You can switch a detector on and it hits it, but you can never surpass the speed. So light is traveling throughout the universe at a at a maximum speed, at a maximum constant. So it's forever expanding. Now, the body is made up of chemical reactions. The mind is made up of chemical reactions. The brain is a, it's a tangible three-dimensional matter in here. These are all have chemical reactions going on in them, and them chemical reactions cause something called electromagnetic light, or they play within the electromagnetic field. That spark, we call it the spark of life. Now the spark of life is light. I have a greenhouse just here. If I took away light from the greenhouse, what happens? Nothing grows. Now, you can argue that things grow in the dark, and it also needs water. It also needs, the other elements that are required for life. And it's true. Things can grow in the dark. Things can grow in complete pitch black. Particle oscillation continues as it always has done in the pitch black and the dark. But life in itself needs light to spark. That's not a contradiction, because even in the things that grow in the dark, if you go to the bottom of the ocean and you look at the very wonderful weird creatures at the bottom of the ocean, what do they all have in common? They all illuminate, don't they? They all have really vibrant light in them. And even the ones that don't, they still have a colour. They're not just dark carbon. If you cut one open, it still has the colour of blood. Now you can say that's just subject to wavelength and interpretation of data. But the point is they all have light in them. That light is a singularity. That light is just one light. There is no such thing as different colours. As Newton, coming back to Newton, when the prism, white light goes into a prism and it deflects loads of different lights, different colours of the rainbow. That's just the spectrum of light. True light is white. The others are just wavelengths of light, which is why the sky at one end looks pink and the other end looks blue on occasions, because they're different wavelengths. But really there is only one light. Now you think about that. That one light is the same light. If there's only one light, that's the same light that's in you, that's in me, that's in all this nature we have around me. Now if you collectively put that one light into a scientific way of thinking, you would have to surrender and say, yes, there is only one light in this entire universe. I'm not talking about photons, I'm talking about origin of light. There is only one, and that origin of light came from singularity in this universe. Therefore, you can very confidently summarize or even surmise that there is only really one me, and that same me is the same as you. Because if I'm not my body and I'm not my soul, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, which you've already determined, and I am light, then I'm the same light as you. I don't use the word soul, I use the word spirit. Now you can call light what you want. I call it a spirit. If you don't want to call it a spirit, call it a light, call it a photon. But we're all of the same photon, are we not? The only difference is the matter. The elements within, they all came from the stars. All our elements came from the stars. And all them stars came from, when they hit dust, when they were in dust, they hit something called the gene mass criteria, and the dust falls into the ball creates gravity, that creates planets, which creates, there's a circle, and then the planets will break up into nothing, into dust again. Ultimately, we are all from the same origin. Think about that, logically. If we all came from the same stars, and all the stars came from dust, that dust came from other stars, and all the matter in the universe came from singularity, the Big Bang, then we are all from the same thing. We're all from the same origin. It's a long way out around answering the question. And the question again is, who am I? You are an endless, infinite spirit. to tune into that spirit, you tune into nature, and you realize everything is just one. Like different bubbles, you know, when they're floating around, different bubbles. Say this is a bubble, this is a bubble. Floating around, each bubble thinks it's different. But the air inside the bubble is the same as the air outside the bubble. The only difference is this. The skin, the matter. Ultimately, we're from the same source. So it's easy to think that things are not going right, that things are, you know, messed up for you, or you're going through hard times. But remember, you are completely in sync and in tune with everything around you, and everything around you is you. And some people will interpret that in different ways. Personally, I interpret that as light is God. God is within me. He's with everything around me. You can call that whatever you want. That's what I call it. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about the ultimate source of light. And the sun's just come out. So don't be so hard on yourself. Don't bang your head against a wall thinking, you know, life is complicated and this is all complicated, because it's not. It's very simple. E equals mc squared. There's only, you know, 3 variables. E, mc. And in science it pretty much covers a lot of ground. We only complicate it because we are too involved or engrossed in the first 2 elements, which are our body and our mind. Utilize them because they have been given to us by the earth. But remember, you are more than that. You are this light that's coming through now. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. Let me know your thoughts if you want to. If you don't, that's fine. Take care.